Hey, I'm Greg Witz. Welcome to betterHUMAN Lite, and I'm going to introduce you to a program or a concept that is going to change your life. In fact, this is the thing that has helped me become way more successful as a leader, as a parent, as a spouse, and just as a human being. This is a concept that comes from psychology, and what this concept says is it says that our personality has a structure to it. Now, some of you might have done these assessments out there and you go through the exercise of learning about yourself, but the challenge with most of these assessments and most of these exercises is we're always left with this unknown. It's cool in the moment, it helps me understand a couple neat things, but it doesn't actually answer why I behave the way I do, why do I feel the way I do, and how did I develop these behaviors. Now, there was a psychologist in 1950, and his name was Dr. Eric Burns. And Dr. Burns came up with a concept that said your personality is made up of three main sections, three main ego states. Now, what this allows us to understand is, once again, why do I communicate, why do I behave, why do I lead, why do I approach situations in the way that I do. And what we understand is the personality in these three main ego states have a function or have a role. Now, the first section of our personality is something called the parental ego states. Now, the name parent isn't to describe age or status or to describe the fact that you have children, it's to describe the behavior. The second ego state, or the second section to our personality, is something called the adult. And the adult side to our personality, once again, isn't to describe age or status, it's to describe role or function. And the final side to our personality is something called the child. And the child, once again, isn't to describe age or status, but it's to describe the role, the function, or the emotion. Now, by understanding the three sections to our personality, by understanding these three main ego states, it starts to answer a lot of questions. It starts to answer, why do I communicate the way I do? Why do I react and behave the way I do? Why do I feel the way I do? Why do I look at the world through this specific lens? Why do I parent this way? Why do I communicate this way? And it has a lot to do with the whole concept that my personality has been forming. Now, if we look at each section of your personality, if we look at the parental section and we say, hey, what is this section for? What does this side of your personality do? What's the role or the responsibility of it? This section, or this side of your personality, is to guide. Now, a simpler way of looking at this side of your personality is this is how we communicate a lot with. When you communicate, when you show up in the world, when you're expressing things, you're usually expressing them in more a dominant, direct, or more of a nurturing, supportive way. I'm going to come back to the parental state in a sec. The second ego state that we have to our personality is something called the adult. And the adult side of our personality, this function, or what the role is this side of our personality thinks. Now, the joke we have about this side of your personality is this is where it all goes wrong. I mean, how many times have you accused someone of not thinking, right? In some cases, you might have been a little more direct and rude about that, accusing them of not having some sort of a brain. But what we're actually seeing in a lot of our own situations, emotional situations, dysfunctional relationships, is the absence of our adult ego state, which I'll explain a little more in a sec. And the final side to our personality is something called the child. And the child's role is to feel. It's all. It's feelings. It's emotions. That's all it is. Now, as we're going through each section of our personality, the question we want to ask ourselves is, this is the role of each side of our personality. One is to communicate and guide, one is to think, and one is to feel, right? Where do these things come from? You know, how do we develop these sides of our personality? Well, what we understand from our parental state and our personality, this is defined as learnt behavior. Right? This is what we actually watched our parental figures growing up. Now, in a lot of cases, you might have heard of the conversation of nature and nurture. It has a little bit to do with this. We were raised in a certain environment. We had certain role models. We had certain parental figures. It might have not been biological mom or dad or parent one, parent two. It might have been more of a parental figure, like an extended family member. But it's not just our family that ends up being role models from a parental standpoint. It's teachers, it's managers, it's friends, it's different people that have shown up in your life that has been in a parental role. And again, I'll describe that a little more. The adult side of our personality develops. And I like to look at this side of our personality a little bit like a flower, right, or a garden. What we want to do is we need to provide nutrients. We need to grow. We need to provide a number of different things for the side or for the garden to grow. And it's kind of the same thing with your adult personality. This is almost like your frontal lobe. This is your intelligent brain. This is how we problem solve. This is how we think. This is how we make decisions. In a lot of cases, what we understand about our adult ego state is it takes a long time to develop. The same way the frontal lobe takes about 25 years to fully develop, our adult also takes about that time to fully develop. And another way of looking at it is this is our emotional maturity. And the final side to our personality, once again, is something called the child. And the child is our feelings, it's our emotions. It doesn't develop, it's not learned. In a lot of cases, it's actually primitive. It becomes the opposite to what we now need to do with these two, which is learn and develop. We actually have to learn how to manage it in some capacity. Now, what we know about personalities is as we're developing our personalities, we tend to gravitate towards one of these ego states more than the other. We tend to be a little more of a parental type of personality, and you might be that personality, or you know these people in your life, right? They're very domineering or authoritative or telling or commanding, controlling, or in some cases a little bit smothering. You either develop maybe to more of the adult, where we become more a little bit of that analytical, sort of, rational, sort of cold type of personality. And in some cases, some of us develop to be more of a child type of personality. Now, this isn't to poke fun at age and maturity. This is to describe emotion. In a lot of cases, what we understand is as we gravitate towards one of these sides of our personalities more and we grow up, this becomes how we show up in the world. I mean, think about those childlike personalities. In a lot of cases, we see these individuals being outgoing and energetic and friendly and happy. In some cases, we actually get irritated with them because we look at them and we think, why are you always happy? But what we're starting to understand about how our personality forms is as we're going through life and we're dealing with these different ego states, we're starting to use them differently and we're starting to fall towards one preferred style versus the other. So a little bit of a question to ask yourself right now is, where do you think you fall? Are you a little more of that parental personality? Are you a little more of that adult? Or are you a little more of that child personality? And remember, we are all of these ego states in our personality. This works like a plate of spaghetti. These things are overlapped with each other. And as much as we have an order to them, and as much as we have a preferred state, we tend to have all of them. Now, if we start to define these a little further and we start to look at between the role and between how we got there, what are the different sides of each ego state, we start to get some subcategories. And what we understand about our parental states, our parental ego states, the parental side of our personality, the learnt side of our personality, is it's divided into two areas. We have what we call a dominant side to the parental state, and we have a giving side to the parental state. And we've named these for you to remember, because it's easier to remember these things in the moment when we've got keywords or themes to take us there. So let's go to the first side of our parental state, the dominant state of our personality, which we've called the critical parent. Now, if you think about this, the name critical parent, we might start to ask, well, what kind of behaviors, what kind of styles, what kind of communication approaches would we get from a critical parent? Now, if we start with something simple like competencies and skill sets, we start to see the critical parent, the dominant side to your personality, allowing you to demonstrate things like assertiveness, being direct, being telling, being more forthright. In a lot of cases in life, in communication, in relationships, in parenting, with significant others, in our professional lives, we need to be able to set healthy boundaries. We need to be able to set limits. We need to be able to say no. And these are all skills and attributes or abilities that come from our critical parent. Now, you might be thinking here to yourself that where you might be thinking, oh, this is what I have difficulty with. I'm more shy. I have difficulty asserting myself. Well, part of the shyness has something to do with your child state, your personality, but the ability to be assertive, to be expressive, to be direct, to be dominant, to be firm, to be forthright comes from our critical parent. Now, one of the things that we want to start to understand is all of these ego states in our personality can be developed. We've just grown and developed, or we've just learned a certain way. You know, in a lot of cases, the reference we've had for communication, the reference we've had for leadership has come from our previous role models, our previous parents in some capacity. And sometimes they screwed us up. Sometimes we learned bad lessons. Sometimes they messed us up because they didn't know how to use these different sides of the personality. You know, what's so cool about this is by the end of today's session, or the end of today's video, you're going to have a complete blueprint for your personality. You will never, ever, ever be able to not understand why you behave and feel the way you do. In fact, a lot of the work that I do with people, and specifically in our full program, the betterHUMAN program, people start to come out of this with this new sense of responsibility, where they start to think things like, oh gosh, I can't get away with this anymore because I understand how my personality contributed to that situation. So one of the things we want to understand with each ego state is there's a volume to this. So it's not just singular. Today I'm talking to you about the individual ego states. But as we start to go deeper with this stuff, we start to recognize that each ego state has a range to it, a spectrum to it. There's a too cold, there's a too hot, and there's a just right. I like to call this the Goldilocks rule. And we can start to think that our critical parent side, our dominant side to our personality, if it is too high, all of those attributes like assertiveness and being direct can be disrupted. This is where we might become overbearing, or this is where you might be controlling, or you know those controlling personalities. They take the air or they suck the oxygen out the room because they're so abrasive, they're overbearing, and they're too controlling. And the opposite applies when that spectrum or that volume is not high enough, which is we'll have difficulty asserting ourselves, and in a lot of cases we might end up with some passivity. So to answer your question, if you're passive, how do I start to become more assertive? Part of the answer there is working the muscle of your critical parent. And what's so cool about ego states, what the gift ego states gives you, is it gives you accessibility to the behavior and the emotion. Gone are the days after today's session that you will not understand why these things happen. In fact, you'll understand exactly why they happen, and you'll have an ability to now start to move or to start to consciously use these things. In fact, as I'm going through this lesson with you right now, if you get a piece of paper and you draw a scale on that piece of paper, 0 to 100 for your critical parent, your dominant side of your personality, kind of go ahead and plot yourself right there. It'll start to give you a little bit of a good indication on where you sit within that behavior. Now, the opposite to the critical parent, or the dominant side of your personality, is the side of nurturance or giving. And we've actually called this what we call the nurturing parent. Now, the nurturing parent is the opposite to the critical parent. The nurturing parent is the nurturing, loving, caring, compassionate side of your personality. In fact, if you've called customer service and you've engaged and you've had an incredible service experience, most likely the personality that you were dealing with on the other end of the phone or the counter or in the store was more of a nurturing parent personality. And just the name nurturing parent, we can start to think about different type of competencies. We can think about the ability to collaborate, to support. You know, we hear a world, and we talk about the world of being empathetic, how important it is for us as parents, as spouses, as leaders, as entrepreneurs, to work the muscle of empathy and gratitude and vulnerability. And this all comes from your nurturing parent side of your personality. And again, the reference we've had for these types of behaviors has actually come from our upbringing and our parental figures. In some cases, we didn't grow up with this type of nurturance, and therefore we've had a difficult time demonstrating it. What we also understand about this side of your personality is this is a side of your personality that cares. This is a side of your personality that you demonstrate love from, nurturance, giving. If you operate in the world of service, you actually show up in the world with the intention to serve, to give back, to provide, and to protect. Welcome to your nurturing parent side of your personality. Now, we also know, like the critical parent, this could get out of whack. In other words, if it's too high, we go from being effective, from collaborating and being patient and supportive and tolerant, to maybe ooey gooey, smothering, overly protective. In some cases, we might start to operate with feelings of guilt. And the opposite applies when it's too low, that when this side of our personality is low, we will have difficulty demonstrating that. And we might actually be a little more apathetic. Now, the success of coaching, the success of leadership, the success of parenting, the success of communication requires both parental states to our personality. And what we understand in our development and how we've grown, we have grown towards one of them more than the other. Now, while you have both sides of your parental personality, you have a preference. You have a preferred parent that you use. In fact, if you're a leader, you either lead through more directness and firmness, or you lead through more counseling and coaching and support. As a parent, if you're more of a critical parent, you probably sort of parent a little more through discipline and rules and structure and expectations. If you're a nurturing parent, you probably maybe parent a little more through compassion and patience and understanding and forgiveness. in relationships. If you're dating a critical parent, you know what it's like to argue with them because they control everything about you in the argument, and you know how you feel. And if you're a nurturing parent, or if you're dating a nurturing parent, you really appreciate them in an argument because they are the ones that are going to actually help that relationship move forward from a place of forgiveness and support. So welcome to the first side of your personality, which is called the parental ego state. And there's a dominant side and a nurturing side, the critical parent and the nurturing parent. And your job as a communicator, your job as a human being is to understand your personality in order to start to work those muscles. Now, in a lot of cases, when I talk around self-awareness, I always remind people self-awareness is a very difficult topic. It is a topic, or it is a conversation of responsibility. We have to, from a true place of self-awareness, look at our dysfunction. We have to take responsibility for that. I have to recognize that as my personality as Greg Witz, I'm a really dominant critical parent. And if I misfire on that, if I mismanage that, leading a business, leading a team, being a parent, being a spouse is going to be disruptive. In a lot of cases, what I've learned to do in my life is understand where these things get out of hand. Now, let's sort of pause on the adult for a second. Let's jump to the bottom one, which is the child. And the child, once again, is feelings, it's emotions. And, you know, this is going to be a little bit of an introduction to emotional intelligence for you. In other words, by the time we're finished here, you're going to understand your emotions and the order to them. Because the only side of your personality that hosts emotions is, again, your child. And your child side of your personality is divided into 3 sections, or 3 ego states. And if you think about it, there's really 3 types of childlike emotions we see from kids. In fact, even adults. Now, the first state of our child is something called the free child, right? The happy child, the spontaneous child. The second state, or the second ego state to your child, is something called the private child, or the withdrawn child. And the final state to your child is something called the reactionary child, or what we like to call the angry child. Right? It's also known as the rebellious child as well. Now, just these names, spontaneous child, withdrawn child, angry child, you're getting a clear indication for the different types of emotions. And like we all have a preferred state to our parental side, we have a preferred state to our child. So let's talk about the first child state, which is in some cases the most natural child. This is what we call the spontaneous child. Now, the emotion is happiness. We think about the spontaneous child being optimistic, friendly, outgoing, social, dynamic, energetic, right? Again, optimistic and impulsive. And the spontaneous child in a lot of cases is the child that tends to get stripped out of us the most the older we get. In other words, as we grow through life, as we start to now get serious about work and about career and about relationships, we're told to take things seriously. In fact, you know, the joke about the spontaneous child is it gets stripped away every time we wake up on Monday. For some of us, I get energized on Mondays, but for some of us, it's like, oh gosh, we got to take things seriously right now. We got to now start to get ready for work. Now, your spontaneous child, the competency brings the ability of creativity, gives us the ability to be outgoing and energetic and inspirational. As a leader, we inspire through our spontaneous child. As a friend, we show up energetic and friendly and happy through our spontaneous child. Now, in a lot of cases, what we also tend to do through our spontaneous child is mask sometimes our feelings. Because in a lot of cases, for us to now start to emotionally express and to share what our true feelings are is difficult. And it is through the spontaneous child that we tend to now mask our feelings with. Now that's going to bring us to the next child, which is called the private child, or what we like to call the withdrawn child state to your personality. Now the withdrawn child state to your personality is the introverted, withdrawn, private state to your personality. Now if you're dealing with things like shyness, if you're battling with shyness, if you feel that sometimes in meetings or in certain relationships you become fearful of bringing things up and expressing things, welcome to your withdrawn child. In fact, the definition of your withdrawn child is fear. It is to avoid. In fact, if you think about it, and you've heard of the concept of fight and flight, welcome to the flight side of your personality. This is a thing that we go inward with. Now, how do we cope with emotions as a withdrawn child? We internalize them. We bottle them up. It creates something called unexpressed emotion. Now, when we are dealing with unexpressed emotion, this is where things start to go wrong with us. Again, if you can start to see that it has nothing to do with some other aspects of our personality, it has everything to do with our withdrawn child. Now, as mentioned earlier, we all have a preferred state. You all have a primary child that you operate from. In other words, when you are faced with stress, when you are dealing with difficult situations, when you're approaching emotional situations, right? You will approach it through one of these childs. Now, the final child that we have, the final emotion that we have, is something called the angry child or the rebellious child. In fact, this is my child, right? So when I'm dealing with situations, when I am coming in and dealing with stress or I'm feeling overwhelmed, the thing that I revert into in my emotional self is my rebellious, aggressive, competitive, angry child. Now, I know we use names like angry child, withdrawn child, spontaneous child, and it's not to give it a negative connotation. These names, angry child, withdrawn child, is to get you to trigger or to be a trigger word for you to understand the behavior very quickly. All ego states, all sides of your personality have what I like to call a little bit of a yin and a yang. They have a pro and a con, a good and a bad, a light and a dark. And what our job is as individuals, as better humans, is to be able to understand our personality intimately and understand when these things are actually working and not working for us. Because if you think about it, there's a time that these things can actually really be a strong attribute. What is a strong attribute of an angry child? It's competitive. It's tenacious. It's gritty. If you think about the times that we're living in, it requires a certain strength, a certain grit, a certain tenacity, a certain hustle, a certain grind, and that is going to come from our angry child, our rebellious child. When we want to push the boundaries, when we want to go to the edge, it is the angry child that takes us there. If you're a professional athlete, it is your angry child that allows you to dig deep in the sport. If you are an extreme sports enthusiast, launching yourself off the mountain has everything to do with your angry child. Now, from your withdrawn child, what are the strengths and the attributes there? When it comes down to being reflective and introspective, when it comes down to keeping certain things private, there is your withdrawn child. If you enjoy reading a good book and sitting by yourself and having a cup of tea, maybe a glass of wine, welcome to your withdrawn child. When it comes down to you being around people and bringing energy and bringing lightness and making everyone in the room lift, welcome to your spontaneous child. Now again, what we're doing today is I'm introducing you to the sides of your personality, and it's gonna take us to a much deeper level of understanding ourselves and communicating. Because what happens in most situations is it is our child that operates first in the moment before anything else. We feel before we think, in other words. And it is in this feeling and in this primitiveness that things tend to either go really bad, right, or you start to manage it. In a lot of cases, the work we do and what we help people with through coaching and through our different training programs is we help them understand how to manage their child ego state. Because it's not that we have to teach you how to be the adult, we just have to help you understand what are the triggers that get you into child and help you get out of child in order to get to the adult. Now, this brings us to the final ego state. The final ego state is something called the adult. And the adult is something that needs to be treasured. The adult is something that we need to work really hard. Like working our brain, it is something that we always need to do. The adult side of our personality is the side that thinks. This is our rational, logical, intelligent side to our personality. This is a side of our personality that allows us to operate consciously. This is a side of our personality that allows us to understand and process the emotion and then decide what we want to do with it. The challenge with us as human beings is we're actually not engaging and using this enough. We are simply racing to what we know. We are now falling to what we've done in the past. In other words, we operate with neurological pathways, connections, and we operate on patterns, right? I feel the way I felt before. I communicate the way I communicate before. I show up and deal with the situation the way I deal with it before or dealt with it in the past. And you know, Albert Einstein said this the best. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. You know, in a lot of cases, it's not the fact that we don't have the answers, we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to move into our adult ego state and take a place of observation, to move into a place of thought. Now, here's a quick little tip for you. Quick little tip is plan your interactions. Take time to think about how you're showing up in the interaction, who's sitting in front of you, what is the communication you want to approach them with. Now, if it's not communication, leadership, sit down and plan your leadership interactions. Which ego state am I? Who am I dealing with? What's going to be the appropriate style for the situation as per my objective? If you need to have a conversation, a difficult conversation with a significant other, with a friend, sit down and plan out that interaction and go, hold on a second, how's the adult going to approach us? And a tip for the adults, or a tip for you to use your adults, one of the things that will help your adult ego state kick into gear is asking questions. Now, there's rules for asking questions, so let's not get crazy with them and start firing questions out like it's a new technique. But one of the things that I can start to do before I'm moving into my interactions is really sit down and ask myself some of those questions. What do I want to achieve? Who am I dealing with? What's the communication going to be about? What are the things I'm going to want to bring up? How do I want to bring these things up? What are the questions I need to ask this person? And it is about taking this approach that allows me to operate through the adult. Because the secret to all of these things is a rule that we teach called PRAT. People respond as treated. It is the ego state that I approach them with, which will draw out their ego state. So in a lot of cases, when your conversations, your interactions, your relationships are going sideways or it's not working out, go look in the mirror, because it has less to do with them and it has a lot to do with you and your own ego states at play. So once again, welcome to your personality. You've got a parental state, an adult state, and a child state, and all of these things make up who you are. And as I said earlier, think about this. Where do you sit in each area? In fact, I started saying get a piece of paper and get that graph out, 0 to 100, and plot yourself. And I said do it with the critical parent. Let's do that same thing with the nurturing parent. Where do we think we sit in that nurturing parent scale? And then maybe let's look and compare those both. Am I stronger on my critical parents? Am I stronger on my nurturing parents? Am I sort of balanced in there? Where do I sit? And be honest with yourself. Now let's jump into the adult. Draw that bar. Where do we sit there? Now, a good way to assess and evaluate this is, am I really affected by emotions? Do I feel a lot more than I think? We might be lower on the adult. Am I too analytical? Do I analyze everything? Do I sweat the small stuff? Do I get caught up in the details? Do I need to process everything? Well, maybe I'm a little high there. And then let's go for child. Spontaneous, withdrawn, and anger. Draw those three scales and plot yourself. Where do you sit? And you'll start to see which is your primary child, and in some cases, what becomes your coping mechanism. Now, I also introduced you to fight or flight before. I just want to come back. The child side of your personality is also the survival state, your personality. It is why you feel before you act or think in all situations. It's why you get that thing in your tummy, right? This is the thing that we operate with through survival. And the angry child fights, the withdrawn child flights, and the spontaneous child freezes. All right, I wanted to introduce you to your personality and the ego states. This is one of the main concepts we use throughout our programs. It is a foundational concept that we use. And if you are interested, if you liked, and you got a lot out of this today, just in this quick little session, I promise you, the program Better Human is going to blow you away. We take this, we explore it a lot more, and we help you understand to pack a number of tools around it. Look, again, for us, we operate in service here at WITS, and for me, I am always happy to stand up and say, let me teach you a few things, and if you got something out of this, amazing. If you want more, go ahead, check out the full program. In fact, reach out to us, and we'd be happy to chat to you a little more about details and answering your questions, and of course, sharing any other information that you need. But if you don't want that, and you want to jump in the program, click that button. All the information is there, and we will see you in the next program.